Hi there, my name is Kim Lucy. I am the Director of Governance, Risk, and Compliance Standards at Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft for about 14 years now and started off my career doing ISO auditing and shifted over to actually developing standards about 8 years ago and have been working in SC42, the committee that helped develop ISO IEC 42005 as well as 42001 and 23894 for about 4 or 5 years. I worked on 42005 as well as both 42001 and 23894. So I am very happy to be here today to talk to you about mastering AI impact assessments with ISO IEC 42005. And I'm going to be talking about part 4 of this series, guidance for the use of ISO IEC 42005 with 42001 and 23894. So the guidance in Annexes A and B of 42005 is guidance for, as I mentioned in the introduction, the use with ISO IEC 42001, which is the AI management system, sometimes known as AIMS, and Annex B, which is guidance for the use with ISO IEC 23894, which is guidance on risk management for AI. Now, both of these annexes are informative, not normative, so they're really just meant for additional information, guidance that can be used to help organizations. They're not requirements. And really what they are meant to do is to help articulate the relationship of 42005 within the kind of broader ecosystem of AI management systems and risk management. So there's kind of a nice diagram here that lays out multiple standards within kind of the AI ecosystem that have been developed within SC42. The internal pyramid there shows the kind of implementation within an organization of ISO IEC 42001, the AI management system. And then it shows the relationship between 42005, 23894, as well as some other standards within that ecosystem. But today we're really going to focus on the relationship between 42005 and that central pyramid and 23894. So the central pyramid as well as those two that are in the red circles. So first up, we have Annex A, guidance for the use with ISO 42001. Really, the purpose of this annex is to demonstrate the alignment between 42001 and 42005. So 42001 is, as I mentioned before, the kind of the foundational standard of these kind of this ecosystem of standards within SC42 and within the management system. And what 42005 was developed for is to really expand on the requirement within 42001 to complete an AI system impact assessment. Now, within 42001, there is both a requirement to do an AI system impact assessment, as well as a system level control within Annex A of 42001 to complete the AI system impact assessment. So you have the requirement both within the clauses of 42001, as well as a control within Annex A of 42001. 42005 was really meant to get further into the guidance for both that requirement and the control within Annex A, give organizations instructions, more context to how you can implement it within your organization, as some of the other sessions within this series have discussed. And what this annex does is to lay out a table with all of the relevant clauses and controls from 42001, give a summary of each of those, and then highlight which section that they align to in 42005 and how 42005 supports the relevant section of 42001. So, it's I think fairly self-evident when you read 42001, which sections are about impact assessments. And, you know, all of this standard really ties into those sections, but for a very easy kind of reference to guide you, if you want a quick lookup to go to and say, hey, what was that section? I want to see where the references are. Annex A is a really good resource for doing that. So for an example, we have that on the next slide. And I've just taken two examples. The full table is much longer than this, but I've just pulled out two examples here to walk through, one from one of the clauses in 42001 and one from one of the controls. So 6.1.4, which is the clause and the requirement for AI system impact assessment. You can see in the table, we have a category for the type, whether it is a requirement or control and implementation guidance, a summary of what that requirement or control is asking for, where it applies in 42005, and some additional guidance for how 42005, how this document supports the part of 42001. So 6.1.4, looking at that, the summary just kind of sums up what the requirement is. For this one, obviously, it is the main requirement to perform a system impact assessment to establish the impact AI systems can have on individuals and societies. For this document, the entire document really applies, because each and every part of that applies to the requirement in 42001 to perform, to design and perform a system impact assessment. And then the guidance and how it supports that, that column gives some more details on that, which includes that, addressing the requirements, that the document can primarily be seen as assisting the organization to create processes and documentation, and that individual assessments can be taken together or holistically as necessary inputs for 42001 6.1.4. The other example here is from the controls in Annex A and B of 42001. So this particular one I think is really interesting because it's about the AI system impact assessment process. So rather than actually the output, the end result, the impact assessment itself, this is about designing the impact assessment process, the designing and documentation of how you're doing the impact assessment process. And this is something that I think organizations often struggle with because there's not necessarily only one way to do a system impact assessment process. If we go back to a foundational clause in ISO 42001, clause 4, which is about the context of your organization, you need to design your management system and the requirements of your management system and your processes based on what your organization needs. And that includes your impact assessment process. So part of what 42005 does is to help your organization understand and ask the right questions about, what do I need? What are the things that are facing my organization in terms of the types of systems that we're using, the stakeholders that we have, the regulatory requirements that we're facing, to help actually design the process itself, not just the output, but the process. Who is approving the impact assessment? How often do we do our impact assessment? Who is on point for making sure that it gets integrated into the design process? So in 42001, we have this control about AI system impact assessment processes, and in 42005, Section 5 talks all about how to actually design and implement the process. Again, not just the output of the end result, but to design the process itself. So that's Annex A. Moving on to Annex B, which is guidance for use with ISO/IEC 23894. So again, ISO/IEC 23894 is a document about risk assessment for AI. And I think that this is a really interesting intersection and a really, really helpful annex that I personally have talked with a lot of people about. There's always a lot of confusion, as well as not argument, but the difference between risk and impact is a kind of fine line, and it's used the same way in different contexts. So the real purpose of this annex is to help articulate the differences between ISO 23894 and 42005 and how they interact, because I think many times, in the ISO context, there are very clear differences between what we mean when we talk about risk versus what we mean when we talk about impact, and specifically system impact. Whereas in the in the industry at large, in public policy, in government, in regulation, impact and risk oftentimes have different uses. They're used interchangeably. And so we have to be kind of very clear about how we're using those terms within the context of these standards versus maybe elsewhere in kind of our general environment. So the structure of this annex is a couple of clauses with the explanations of the differences between the two standards, and then a diagram that I find super useful, and again, I've used in a lot of different contexts, illustrating the relationship between the two. So I won't go through the clauses. It's generally kind of some prose explaining those differences. I've included the diagram on the next slide, which we'll walk through. So what this diagram aims to do is to lay out the relationship between risk, between system impact assessment, and also between the AI management system as a whole. So if you think again about the diagram on the first slide that I showed with that kind of pyramid in the middle, and the AI management system at the bottom of the organization, you can think of this as kind of inverted, where it's at the top. And then you think about organizational level objectives, organizational level risk management, which 23894 talks about. 23894 is both a standard that looks at organizational risk. So as you're an organization who is implementing AI systems, you need to look at the impact of those systems on your organization from a legal level, from a reputational level, from a security level. And that is one focus of 23894. There is another focus, which is also the system level focus. Once you've implemented those systems, what are the risks of those systems? So you need to kind of think about risk assessment and risk management from both the perspective of the organization as well as the system. And so this diagram kind of lays that out nicely. You can see on the left here, we've got organizational level as well as system level. We've then laid these out in terms of potential events, impact to the organization, and then importantly, impact to individuals and impact to societies. Now, these are the impacts that are the focus of AI system impact assessments in 42005. 42005 is not concerned with impacts to the organization. AI system impact assessments are concerned with impacts to societies and individuals. And this is really important because this impact on a individual and society level is what's really key to much of the AI regulation that we're seeing, particularly the AI Act in the EU, new regulations that we're starting to see across the rest of the world. So while again, sometimes the terms risk and impact are used in differently in different contexts, the way that 42005 is talking about impact and system impact assessments, the focus is how AI systems are impacting individuals and societies. And what this diagram is aiming to do is to harmonize that with how 23894 rolls up to organizational risk management, organizational objectives. And you can see in the rest of this diagram how the results of an AI system impact assessment and the impact to individuals and societies can actually be incorporated into things that also impact the organization, the likelihood of all of those events occurring. Those can be aggregated into the results of risk assessments for the entire AI system. That can be part of overall risk management for your entire organization. That can be shared with leadership as part of your management system if you've implemented 42001 and have an effect on the overall objectives of your organization. So none of this is meant to say that you have to do it this way, but it's a nice diagram that shows how all of these foundational standards can be kind of harmonized together. And if you're implementing them all within your organization, how they fit together in a way that your organization can implement them and organize them in a way that makes sense. So that's all I have for today. Thank you very much for listening, and stay tuned for part 5 in the series where Annexes C and D will be discussed. Annex C is about the harms and benefits taxonomy, and Annex D is aligning AI system impact assessment with other assessments such as privacy impact assessments. So again, my name is Kim Lucy. I'm from Microsoft, and I've enjoyed my time today, and thank you very much for sharing it with me.